Hello everyone, and welcome to the third ANCP webinar in 2019. My name is Vicky. I'm at the Ethics Learning team. Before we start, can I please have someone to type into the chat area to confirm that the sound is coming through? For better sound quality, it will be helpful if you close all background applications, including the Outlook. Oh, perfect. Thank you. I'll now quickly go through some housekeeping matters. Today's webinar will be recorded and uploaded to ADP's YouTube channel. I'll send everyone a follow-up email next week, and it will have a link to the video as well as a copy of the slides. As the webinar goes, please feel free to type your questions in the chat area. Our speaker may answer your questions as she goes or at the end of the presentation. At the end of the webinar, there will be a quick survey. Please stay and complete the survey and do not close the browsers. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our speaker, Rosemary Welsh, Senior Program Officer in the DFAT ANCP team. Thanks, Rosemary.
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks everyone for logging on this Tuesday afternoon. Hope you're all ready for a fun hour. Just before we get in, just to say thank you to ACFID for organising the webinars every year, and as Vicky said, this is the third ANCP webinar, so look forward to talking to you all this afternoon. As Vicky said, my name's Rosemary Welsh and I'm a Program Officer within the ANCP team, and I work in the operations section, which specifically looks after the ANCP program, and the annual cycle, and kind of anything else that doesn't fit into the other areas of our section, such as accreditation, monitoring and evaluation, and communications. So as we've got here today, I've got a few PowerPoint slides where I'll just run through some information, and then what we'll do is we'll move over into the actual ADPlan form itself. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go into seeing Smarty Grants itself, so I've got the PDF versions that were emailed out to ANCP Contacts 1 and 2. Hopefully this works just as well as going through the live form, and as we move throughout the PDFs, I'll try and point out sections or things that are helpful as if we were in the actual form itself. What I'll do as well as we move through the forms is highlight some of the changes that have occurred from last year's forms to this year's forms. And now we've got a range of people that have logged on today and that are listening. So this session today will be pitched at the basic level. So as Vicky said, please feel free to ask your questions as we move along. Just one other thing to highlight about the changes that have happened from last year to this year. What we developed this year, just to kind of give everyone a snapshot of what had occurred, we've got a quick reference sheet which details specifically the changes. So if you weren't able or you haven't got a copy of that, please just get in touch with us at ancp@dfat.gov.au and we'll be able to email that out for you. Okay, so just to run through a few things, as I said before we get into the forms. As you should be aware, this year budget night was early, so we actually got told the budget on the 2nd of April, which for the ANCP has not changed compared to last year. So even though we know the budget for this year, we still have had to wait for everyone to submit their RDE. And for our financial consultant, for if you were listening to the RDE webinar, which is Jeff Simkis, he reviewed all the RDEs over the month of April. And so now we've got a finalised RDE set and the budget. We're working through allocating everyone's grant amounts. So as it says here, in mid-May, we'll confirm your grant amount as well as issuing your grant agreements. So just not able to give you a specific time, like a specific date, but the grant amount confirmations that we'll be emailing out should be coming very soon. So please stay in touch for that. And the next step, as you would all be aware, so once we've got the grant agreements back, ad plans themselves are due on 30 June at 5 p.m, which this year is a Sunday. So I guess just note that when you're completing your ad plans, if you have any questions or technical issues, the last day to get in touch will actually be the Friday. So please make sure if you're having any issues that you get in touch with us then, because if you try and contact us on the weekends, unfortunately we won't be in the office. Then moving along, the next one there you'll see, and for those of you with a keen eye, you can see that actually there's a mistake on that slide. So 30th of September, that's actually when performance reports are due. So not ad plans, that is supposed to say performance reports. So performance reports are due 30 June, 5 p.m, which for this year is a Monday. Just to move through some of the program updates. So hopefully, or as you should be aware, so we're in the last year of the ANCP funding policy. And as you can see here on the screen, for the year 2019-20, the funding policy says that the maximum decrease that an NGO will receive is 20% from your grant agreement from last year, and the maximum increase that you'll receive is 25%. And I guess just to talk you through, so as well as the funding policy that we have that outlines, how much your grant can fluctuate, whether that's a decrease or an increase, there are also 4 variables that also come into play when we look at calculating grant agreements. So first of all, we've got the total budget itself. So as I said before, the budget for 2019-20 hasn't changed from last year. But, for 2018-19 and for 2017-18, there was an increase. So the budget can play a factor into your grant amounts. We've also got your RDE. So if you have had an increase or a decrease, or maybe you've had a stable RDE, that can impact your grant amount. We've also got the third variable we've also got is other NGOs' RDE. So even though your RDE itself might have increased, there could have been, for example, 5 other NGOs that had, larger or larger increases or larger decreases, which have adjusted their grant amounts, which affects your grant amount itself. And lastly, we've also got NGOs that are either increasing from base level to full level, or NGOs that are either moving from full level down to base, or we've either got NGOs that are leaving the ANCP or new entrants to the ANCP. So we've kind of got 4 variables there that can impact your grant amount. So as I said, very soon we'll be sending out emails that have your grant figure. So please just keep these things in mind if there is a change. And of course, if there is a change to your grant amount and you would like some clarification as to why, again, please get in touch with us and we'd be happy to talk you through that. All right, the next slide here is just to give you a bit of an idea about what happens on our side once you've submitted your ad plans. So ad plans, as I said before, submitted 30 June. Once everyone, sorry, just stopping here, we've just got a question that relates to the previous slide. So someone's wanting to know, is there an update on the ANCP funding policy beyond 2019-20? So as of now, there's not an update as such to tell you exactly about what is progressing for next year. The update now itself is that we are working on looking at that, and kind of setting ourselves parameters about what the funding policy could look like. So I guess on this front, just stay tuned, and when we know, when we're in a position to let you guys know about what the new funding policy could look like, we'll definitely share that with you. So just keep an eye out for that, because as right now, it's still kind of in the works on our side. So I hope that answers your question there. Okay, so just going back to the ADPlan assessment process. So once you've submitted your ADPlans on 30 June, the ANCP team, we run what we call initial assessment reports, and basically this just looks at some high-level information to make sure that grant agreements are listed correctly, so the figures are correct, and other things like that. All the project forms have information and that nothing's missing. So once we've got that down, then we're ready to move on to the next step. Then what we do is we run different reports that look at either projects that are brand new, working in high-risk locations, or any significantly changed projects. So those projects we send out to our posts and we ask for their input on these projects. Whilst that is happening, we also in the team, so in the ANCP team, we also assess your projects that you've submitted, and we look at all projects. So we look at continuing as well. So once we've finished our assessment and post have looked at your projects as well and given us their feedback, we consolidate the feedback into one form and then we send that back out to you. The next step there, you can see if there's any amendments that we've requested that you make, or it could just be some clarifications or small edits, we ask you to do that. And then finally, we'll hopefully have the ADPlan approved by 30 July. There could be some cases where, a large proportion of your ADPlan is approved, but you might just have one or two projects that we're still working on amendments. But by 30 July, you should have proper consolidated feedback and an idea of where you're at. And then, of course, once we have assessed everything, you can send through your invoice for the tranche 1 payment for this financial year. So hopefully that makes sense. I guess if there are any questions about the ADPlan assessment process, please just let me know. But if there are no questions about the internal process that we do here on our side, what we'll do now is we'll move to the form itself, and I'll take you through that. Now, as I said before, unfortunately we couldn't get on to Smarty Grants itself, but we've got the PDFs here which I'll talk you through. What I'm going to do first is go through the header, and then we'll move to the project form. Now, just before I get to the project, the header form, as you can see here, I've got the form up here, but obviously when you're going into Smarty Grants, this will look a little different. So when you're logging on to Smarty Grants, please use the link that was sent out to ANCP Contacts 1 and 2 that advised that the 2019-20 ADPlan round was open, as that will take you directly to the spot that you need to be in Smarty Grants. So once you've clicked that link, you'll get the Smarty Grants log on. So you'll log on through there. And then the next page that you'll come to, you'll actually have two options up the top. One is My Submissions and the other one is Log Out. So for this one, you'll just need to click My Submissions and you'll be able to see all your previous headers, programs and projects. And as well the spot there that you can start work on your 19-20 ADPlan information. So as I said, unfortunately we can't see that today, but if anyone's having any troubles actually getting into your 1920 ad plan, please just get in touch with us and we'll be able to walk you through that step. So once you're in Smarty Grants and you found the right spot and you're in your 1920 ad plans, you can obviously fill out your programs or project or headers in any order, but what I'm going to do here is go through the header first and then move to the project. So this section here just details the ad plan, information about the ad plan header and what it's used for and what we're looking for. So as we move on, the header here, this is really the information that we're looking for about your NGO. So it's that high level information about the NGO itself. So we've got organisation details. So here, as you can see, we've got the organisation name, the trading name, if that's different to your organisation name. There's the accreditation type. So the response in there will either be if you're full level or base level, and then your ABN. The last spot down there on this page is your NGO financial year period. So for this, we understand that NGOs work to different financial years, so just put the information in here that's relevant to your financial year. The next section here is just your NGO postal address details. So hopefully all here it's self-explanatory. So just looking for your postal address and your street address. Now we move into the contact details. So these are all the details that of your NGO, but as well the information that we need if we ever need to contact you or know who to contact. So we've got the head of the NGO as well as the executive assistant in case we need to get in contact with them. We've got the authorising officers, the board member, and here we've got the ANCP contact 1 and 2. Please, we ask in here that there is both the ANCP contact 1 and 2. These are the contacts that the ANCP team use if we ever need to get in contact with you. And it's also really good if you ever have a change in who your contact details are. This is the spot that it needs to be updated. So the ANCP team itself don't have any approval to go in and change NGOs' ad plan details. So you'll need to come to us and let us know that your details have changed, and what we can do is reopen your form, but then it will be on you guys to update the details and then submit it back to us. As well with the ANCP contact and the other organisation contacts here, when populating your grant agreements, we will be using the 2018-19 data set that is in Smarty Grants. So we ask that the contact details in your 1920 ad plan are correct and up to date. But just for this period, as we haven't actually moved into 1920, we also ask that you please keep your 18-19 contact details up to date, just in case we need to contact you, or as I said, when we're populating your grant agreements, yeah, it'd be really good if those were all up to date. As we move on, we've got the monitoring and evaluation and the finance contact details. Then as we move on, we've got the child protection and communications officer. Then the next section here, when we move on from contact details, we've got the executive summary, which here we look at the organisational overview. So this here should just be a brief introduction outlining your NGO. So we kind of ask in here that it's a brief snapshot that we could use if we ever needed to tell anyone about your NGO. Yes, sorry, I was just looking. We have a question here that is asking a question about the contact details, and it's asking whether the details are populated from previous years. So yes, thank you for that point. That is a good point to let everyone know. The data migration that happened from last year, so from this current year, from 18-19 into 19-20, organisational contact details are migrated over from last year. So yes, I guess if there are any changes or any new people in these roles, we ask that these are kept up to date. But yes, they are populated over from last year. So I guess it's just a matter of making sure that all the information in there is still correct. If you do have any issues with your data migration, so if anything in your header level form or your project level form is missing or isn't correct, please email us and let us know those details, and we can actually work with the Smarty Grants team themselves to see if we can fix that. Unfortunately, the ANCP team doesn't have the technical skills to work in Smarty Grants, although we wish we did. So please get in touch with us, and we'll make sure that we get in touch with Smarty Grants and make sure we can find a solution for you. Okay, so now moving on in the organisation overview, we've got the new initiatives and activities in this ADPlan period. So in here, this is the space where you can detail to us any new initiatives that your NGO is undertaking. It could be a range of activities that are listed in here. And just to point out that in here, as this is just a snapshot of your NGO and the new initiatives that you're undertaking, dot points in this section are really welcome. So if you have a few things going on and you want to let us know, you know, writing out paragraphs doesn't provide you with enough space, definitely a good way to cut that down is just dot points in this section. And if we ever want any more information or to go through things further, we can get back in contact with you. Now, here's where we have, in the header, we've got the expected beneficiaries, and these next boxes or slides that we go through, a lot of this information is actually populated from the project forms. So when we move into the project forms, you'll see what I'm talking about. But basically, in the header level here, it's going to look at all your projects and the number of beneficiaries that you have and just tally that up and tell you here your total number of beneficiaries. So hopefully you can all see below the box here itself, it's kind of in a lighter grey colour, but there's a note here that says this number/amount is calculated. So wherever you see that in the header, it's just letting you know that it's pulling the information from the project level form and totaling them up for you here. I guess just one thing to also note here, this beneficiaries is where there has been a change from last year's form in the ADPlan section. So previously for beneficiaries, we have asked for disaggregated data, so by sex, age, people with a disability, Indigenous and ethnic minorities. For ADPlans, there's no longer a requirement that these are, the numbers here are disaggregated, but just I guess to make really clear, it's still expected in performance reports. And as such, it's still expected that you have that information and you are collecting it. It's just that in the ADPlan form itself, we're not asking you to put down that information. Moving on now, we're going to look at the, this is the funding and the budget section. So here is where you'll detail, I guess I'll just move through the boxes that are listed here. First of all, you've got your rolled over funds from your 2018-19 grant amount. Just as well to note, as you should be aware, it's also detailed in the ANCP manual, NGOs can roll over up to 10% of their grant amount, without getting in contact with us. If it is over 10%, please make sure that you get in contact with us, as we'll just talk to you about your rollover figure and make sure that we're both DFAT and the NGO are comfortable that those funds will be expended in this financial year, as rolled over funds can only be rolled over into one financial year. So we've just really got to make sure that there's a plan in place that the funds can be expended in this financial year. The next box down there is just the interest rolled over from your funds. As well, just to note here that we know that as the financial year for 2018-19 has just ended on 30 June, which is when you're submitting your new ad plan. So in here, if it's not totally known, an estimate is okay, and then if you know later in the year when you know later in the year what that amount is, you can get in contact with us and we can note that down and then open your forms and you can adjust the information in there. So the next spot here is just your ANCP grant amount, which, as I said, will be emailed out to you very shortly. And then the next box is just the estimated interest for this ad plan period. And so again, just to stress here that the figure in this box here is an estimate. Then in the next section here, it'll have your total ANCP funding for 1920. And as I pointed out before, it's got the little caveat below that says that this number is calculated. So what it's going to do is add up the sections that we've just been through and populate in here your total ANCP funding. All right, then as we move down, we've got some more of the budget section. So we've got your total ANCP grant amount. And sorry, just before we move on, this section here, hopefully you can see, and it's not too blurry, all of this next section here is automatically calculated. So this is where the header is going to pull the information that you've listed in your projects. So you've got your ANCP grant amount, you've got your rollover, you've got your estimated interest, and then the next section here is your planned administration or overheads. So this is where, and this is the only spot in the section here that isn't calculated. So this is where you're going to manually input how much of your grant amount you're using for admin costs. Admin costs can be up to 10% of your ANCP grant amount. So we have some NGOs that use the full 10%, or we have some that is less, and that information is not detailed in the project form itself, which is why it needs to be inputted here. And sorry, as I should point out, over on the right-hand side, you can see that there is actually the admin 10% validation. So that box there is going to see the figure that you put in the planned administration box, and if it's more than 10% of your total grant amount, it actually won't let you submit the form. So just, we've had in some cases, even if it's over by 1 cent. So just make sure that the figure that you've got in there does not exceed 10%. We've also got the space here for your costs, that is your design, monitoring and evaluation expenditure. Again, as per the ANCP manual, this can be up to 10% of your ANCP grant. And again, over on the right hand side, you can see that there'll be a validation in the form here, which again will check that the figure that you've inputted there is not more than 10% of your grant amount. And moving along, we've got your NGO contribution. So this one here is actually a minimum of 20%. So again, it's going to check that the figure that you've popped in here is not less than 20% of your grant amount. But just to let everyone know that it can be greater than 20%. We do have NGOs that contribute more than 20, so that is not a problem if it is greater. So we've just got a question that has come in, and it's a question around the design, monitoring and evaluation costs. So it says, is the 10% for design, monitoring and evaluation for your overall grant allocation? And what if you have more than one project that you wish to evaluate? So your design, monitoring and evaluation costs don't have to be split evenly across your projects. So you can, for example, have projects that aren't being evaluated. You know, we've got in the ANCP manual that projects have to be evaluated every 3 years. So say if you have some projects that are in the second year, and so this year you're not looking at putting any cost towards that, that is okay. So it's not 10% per project, it's 10%. That is okay. So it's not 10% per project, it's 10% of your total grant amount. So the way in which you can use that 10% is up to NGOs. So hopefully that answers that question. Let me know if you need any more information on that. And moving on to the last bit of the header form, this is where it's just the certification section. So basically, this section here is just so we know that there is some high-level oversight into your ANCP programming for the year. So, you know, we do get questions here about who can actually authorise this section here. That, again, is up to you. We just, you know, you just need to ensure that you have a good judgment call as to who that is. You know, depending on the size of your organisation, that it might be the CEO that is signing off on that, or it could be the international programs manager. Really, as long as that person has the authority to sign off on this, that is fine. It's up to NGOs themselves to determine who will certify this section here. That there is the end of the header form. So now what I'll do is move into the project form. Hopefully that answered everyone's questions there about the header, but as I said, please just pop any questions in that you have. Okay, so we've got, now we're moving into the project form. And as opposed to the header form that looks at the organisational details, this is where we want the information to be really specific to the project itself. So similar to the ADPlan form, the first screen here is just letting you know about the project form itself and what we're looking for and how they're used. Then as we move on, the first bit of information here we're looking at is the project summary. So essentially it's the project details, like the project name, a brief description of the project itself, the start and end date, and the current status of the project. So just to touch on here, the start date here is when ANCP funds will be first allocated to the project. So we understand that you might have this project running and it might be using another funding source, but if it's the first year of this project that's using ANCP funds, please put the start date that reflects this. And similarly, same goes for the project end date. So that should be when the project is likely to conclude. So, sorry, I'm just looking here. We've got a question that's come in. Sorry, so we've got a question here that's talking about the program dates. So it's asking if a project is continuous over 3 years, will the start date be the first year? So the answer to that is yes. If you've got a project that's running over 3 years, but it's this year is the first year that's got ANCP funds, the start date should reflect that. Okay, so the next section here, so current status of project. This is where we can get some further information about that relates to the project start date itself. So the options that we've got here are the first year of implementation of the ANCP. We've got a new phase of new phase of an ANCP project, or a continuing ANCP project. So the first box here, the new first year of implementation in the ANCP is brand new project. So like I said before, if the project is continuing but it didn't have ANCP funds, here you're going to tick first year of implementation. The next one here, so new phase of an ANCP project. You know, we've seen there are NGOs that have multi-year projects that could involve 3 or 4 phases. So what we want to see here is, why you would tick this box is, say if up until 30 June this year, you've got your first year of your first phase complete of your project. The project's still continuing, and there's still ANCP funds and everything, but it's just starting a new phase. So possibly at the end of phase 1, you might have done an evaluation or you know, tracked the project throughout. That means that this new phase, or the second phase, is going to have some adjustments or updates made to it. So this is what we're looking for here if there's a new phase of an ANCP project. As we move on to the next slide, you'll be able to see that there's a space where you can detail previous information about the previous phase. So hopefully that's clear. There was a question about what's the difference between new phase and continuing ANCP project. So this is just where if you've got a milestone, you know, in the project itself, that it's finishing phase 1 and moving into phase 2, that you tick this box here. The third box here is just continuing ANCP project. So you might be moving on from year 1 to year 2 or year 2 to year 3, but there haven't been any major variations or anything. It's just a continuing ANCP project that is listed here in this project form. So we've got another question that's come in here, and it's asking, can you have a new phase as well as a continuing project? So what we would ask here is, if you are starting a new phase of a continuing project, the option that you would select here is new phase. We'll definitely be able to understand that it is a continuing ANCP project, but we would like to see that if it's a new phase, we would like to see some information about that, and ourselves just be aware that the second or third phase of the project is happening this financial year. Okay, so as we can't use Smarty Grants, the text here in green is just the way that the form would populate depending on which option you've selected. So you can see here that if you have first year project or a new phase selected, you'll be able to provide details of the project prior to this current ad plan. So whether it's a brand new project, you know, that you want to tell us about, there was a design going on, you can tell us in here, or if it's a new phase, you'd tell us about the previous phase that was happening. If you've selected continuing project, the next question that will come up is asking you whether there were any major significant changes to the project from the last ad plan period. So the options in that box will be yes or no. So if it's no, nothing more will be asked, but if it's yes, the box here will show on the Smarty Grants form, and it's just going to ask you to identify the significant changes. So whether there was a change in funding, beneficiaries, you've added countries, so there's a sector focus change, anything that's listed here that happened to your project, we ask you to select. And again, it's just information for us to be aware of when we're looking at your project. The next section here is the DAC codes, which you'll fill out. So you'll need to have a primary DAC code and a secondary DAC code. There is a space for a third DAT code, but that is not a requirement, so that is optional there, but you must have a primary and secondary. And just to, two things on the DAT code, so just to make sure that you check each year as they can be updated, so the DAT code that you used last year might not be available this year, as well as remembering that if your project has any family planning element to it, it must be put in here as a primary or secondary DAT code. The next question here, or the next spot here, sorry, is just on your partner details. And this space here is where we do have changes from last year. So the first section here is looking for if you are working in consortium with another ANCP NGO. So what we're looking for here is arrangements where you're working with another ANCP NGO using ANCP funds on an ANCP project. So we acknowledge that their NGOs have other arrangements, you know, of partnerships or other arrangements where you're working with other NGOs. But for this consortium section, it must be another ANCP NGO on an ANCP project using ANCP funds. If you have an arrangement outside of that, there's still space in the form where you can detail this, such as the partners or funding from other sources. So this section here is only for that specific area of ANCP consortiums. If the answer is yes to this question, please in this spot here provide us details of the arrangement. So that can really be you know, up to you as to what you put in here, but basically we're looking for you know, who you're working with, each of your responsibilities or contributions to the project, you know, what everyone's responsible. So whether that's done by outputs or dollars or any other way that you are measuring that, whatever way is fine, just as long as the information that's put in here is clear to us. The next section as you move through the form is the information on your partners, and you'll be able to see here. So the first section here will be the name, then the partner type, which unfortunately we can't see on the PDF here, but there is a drop-down list of options that you can select. And the same with the partner relationship. So that's just looking for, might be a purely financial relationship, might be non-contractual, whatever it is, you can list here. And you'll be able to see in the form that there is a plus and a minus button off to the right-hand side, so you can add or delete partners as you like. Just another thing to note here is when if your NGO has a multi-country project and the partner name that you put in is not particularly obvious as to which country that partner belongs to, we ask that after the name you put in brackets the country. So as it says here, say if you were working with the Department of Health, but you were working in a multi-country project in Fiji, Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, we just ask that you put in brackets after the Department of Health which country that relates to. The next section here is the country detail, so it'll just ask you, it just is looking for the information of where this project is being implemented. If it's not a multi-country project, you'll just need to fill out the one line that is listed here. So first of all, you put the country where you're working, the key provinces or regions, the total proposed funding. So again, if it's a single country project, it'll be the total amount of funding that you're putting on this project, and same goes for the expected beneficiaries. The last spot here is looking at whether the country is physically being delivered in the country or not. So we do have some projects where it might be an e-learning So the project is actually, being rolled out in Fiji, but there's not a physical presence in that country. So if there's not a physical presence in that country, please select no. But if you are working in that country and the project is being delivered on the ground, please select yes. And so similar to the partners above, on the right hand side there is a plus and a minus button. So if it's a multi-country project here, that's where you would add another country and then detail the provinces as well as the funding and the beneficiary. So just to let you know that if you do have a multi-country project, the form is going to look at the figures that you've put in the funding as well as the figures that are put in the expected beneficiaries, and it's going to make sure that the split that you have across your countries matches your total amounts that you've listed in the project form. So just a thing to note there, even if you're out by cents or $1, it's not going to let you submit the form. So just make sure that you've got your breakdowns exactly. Moving on, here's where we've got the funding and the beneficiary information. So the information that goes in these spots is the total amount for this project. Yeah, so hopefully that's self-explanatory. The next section here is looking at project locations. So it asks you for each of the address each locations where your project is being implemented. Just one thing to note here, we know that everywhere that NGOs are working don't necessarily have a neat address, line of 12 Happy Place, Canberra. So if there is something in there, for example, the postcode, that you don't have or you don't know, or there isn't one, just put either full stops in there or zeros, just so the form has something in it, and then you'll be able to move on to the next section. But basically there has to be something in there for the form to allow you to move on. All right, now getting down kind of into the more detailed, or qualitative bit of the project form. So here we've got the project description, which is just can be a further elaboration of the project brief that was listed up above. So the space here is 300 words that you've got to tell us about the project. Next is the project outcomes, which again is 300 words, and it's the space where we ask you to set out the high-level project outcomes that will be achieved over the life of the project. So the next section here is the project outputs. So these again are the outputs over the life of the project. So you'll be able to see, similar to the information that we went through earlier, there is a plus and a minus section here. So you can, for the years of your project, you can tell us the project outputs. So a good thing to think of here is that if it is a continuing project that has been going on for some years, it would be nice for us to see definitely last year's outputs, and if you had it maybe the year before, then as well definitely the information on this year's current outputs. When you look forward to further year outputs, so say if this project goes to 2024, we do expect that there would be information populated here that details the project outputs that have been thought through, the project design itself. We will, however, note when we look at this that, as the project moves along throughout the years, that these could change. So it's not something that we will hold you to, but it's something that we would like to see, listed here, as we would expect that you would have that information. There's a question here that's talking about the word limit of the project description. And sorry, I should have mentioned this before. Similar to the header, there will be information here that has been migrated over if it's an existing project from last year's form. And so we've got a question here. For example, the project description last year, the word count was 600, but this year it's cut back to 300. So it's looking. The question here is, does this mean that you know, the information migrated over from last year to this year's forms won't be there, or will it be cut off? The information will be there. So the 600 words that you have from last year will have migrated over. It's just that this year the form will know that there's only allowed to be 300 words in there, and so unless you pare that back, the form won't let you submit. So yeah, the information will be there. It's just that you'll need to adjust the information to fit the word limit for this year, and once you've adjusted it, you'll be able to move through. So I hope that answers that question. The next spot here is the funding. So we're going to look at the ANCP grant amount allocated to this project, any rolled over funds that you have allocated to this project, as well as the estimated interest earned from the ANCP funds. And then again, you'll see there that the last box there will auto-calculate the figures that are listed above. The next section is on the design, monitoring and evaluation. So this is where you detail the costs that you've put for DM&E for this project in here. As I said before, design, monitoring and evaluation can be up to 10% of your total grant amount. But it's not per project. So there's no validation here that's going to say, you know, that it's 10% more than the project, the total funding for this project. We do, however, you know, we will look at this, you know, for example, if it's significantly high or there's, you know, something just seems a bit off with this figure. You know, we are aware that there could be very valid reasons as to why it's high or why, you know, the number is itself. But yeah, just, you know, we could look at that and we might come back to you. But again, just noting, we understand there are reasons why, and that it's not 10% of the funding amount itself. The next section here, and it might run over the 2 pages, we've got your NGO contribution, which you're allocating to this project. So again, that is not, so NGOs have to contribute a minimum of 20% of their total ANCP grant, but it doesn't have to be proportionate to your funding for your project. So for example, for the project that you know, the first project that you're filling out, you might not have any co-contributions to the project, which is fine, just as long as the total amount adds up to a minimum of 20%. One thing just to highlight here is when we run the reports that we send out to Post, whether they're new, high-risk location or significantly amended, Post will see this spot here. So we just like to say it is a good you know, chance for you to think about how you are allocating your contributions. You know, as it sometimes Posts have come back to us here in Canberra and kind of questioned why there was no funding of your contribution allocated. So definitely no you know, hard rule that there has to be something per project, just something for you as NGOs to think about as to how you divide your contribution amongst projects. The next section here is looking at funding from other sources. So the first question will just ask you whether or not there are any funding from other sources that you have received specifically for the project. If no, then you know, nothing more will come of this question. But if yes, we ask you to detail here the funding amount, the donor name, so where that funding is coming from, and the partner type. If you have, sometimes there could be some grey areas around, in this space about, does this actually mean that we've had some questions in the past where people just wanted to clarify for some funding that they've got from another donor and whether it needs to be put in this space. Please get in contact with us if you are unsure, as we'll be able to work through each scenario as they come through. As sometimes the answer could be no, there's no need to put that in this field, but sometimes it could be yes. So if you're unsure, please get in touch with us. The next section here is on project risks, and I note that we're kind of pushing pretty close to the 3 p.m, so I'm trying to get through as fast as I can, but again, please let me know if I'm rushing or that you have any questions. Just going back to the funding from other partners, we've got a question in here that's, would funding include other types of donations? So if you're talking about other types of donations being, for example, volunteer services, that wouldn't be included here, as this section is purely looking for funding in terms of money. So I think there was a question on this that was sent out to everyone, where we did a few follow-up questions from the ANCP information sessions in March. So I'd be happy to possibly, when we send out the webinar with the link and everything, I can include those questions as follow-up. But in this space here, it's just funding in terms of money. So there's been another clarification here, what if it was medication or any other types of donations that you've got? This space here is purely for funding, so other types of donations such as medications would not be included. For these types of, when you do have other types of donations, please just make sure that this is detailed throughout the ADPlan. So for example, in your project description, you can tell us there that, you have received donations, medical donations from X, donor, and that they're being used towards this project. So that way we'll still know that you have those other types of donations that are included in this project, but it's not specifically funding, so it would not go in this section here. So we've just got another question that's coming in here that says, one way to get funding is getting funding for the project via us, and the other way is for implementing partner getting funding directly on the ground. Do we have to list the latter? So it does not go by us or is managed by us, but it is directly by the partner. So here we're looking for this information, all the information here in your ADPlan, so whether it's your header form or your project form, is about you, the Australian NGO. So if you are not receiving funding and not managing that funding to deliver the project, it wouldn't go in this ADPlan. As I said before, we know that your in-country partners or whoever else you're working with have their own arrangements, and they could be working on the project, inputting onto the project as well. But if it's not, the information about you as the NGO on the things that you're managing and directly working on, it wouldn't go in here. That's not to say that if, for example, in the project description you needed to, it's okay to, tell us about that. But really here in the form we're looking for specific information about you, the NGO, and the project that is being implemented. Okay, I'll try and speed this up if we're, running out of time, but please bear with me. The next section here is on project risks. So here we're looking for, we're not looking for war and peace, but we're looking here that you have detailed appropriate risks that are relevant to the project, and that, for example, there just isn't one risk listed here. So there is a summary listed there about the type of risks that we're looking for. As well, we want to see that it's not a copy and paste between each project. So please make sure it's specific project risks to your project. The next section here is about high-risk locations. So for here, we're looking if you're working in a do not travel location. So it's going to ask, the first question here is asking you what is the highest level of travel advice for the project location that you're working in. And if you select here, do not travel, it's going to ask you some follow-up questions where we need some further information. Here, if your project is a multi-country, and you could be working in projects that have low travel classifications, but one project location in your multi-country project is do not travel, you must select the do not travel. So as you can see, the question asks, what is the highest level of travel advice? So that's across your entire project if it's multi-country. So if you select do not travel, the next question that is asked is, will Australian staff or contractors travel to the do not travel location? If no, so no one is going there, we still want you to outline here the security and safety measures in place for local implementing staff working at this location. And a consideration here is also given to how the project will be remotely monitored, as well as the risks to delivery outputs that may occur in this unstable environment. If the answer to the question of Australians travelling to these locations is yes, here we'll need some specific information as to why Australians are required to travel this location, as well as risk assessments addressing the consequences of the security and safety for your staff travelling there. So there's further information there about what we're looking for in this section, but if the answer is yes, we're really going to look at this selection question here and make sure that the information provided is really concise and thoroughly detailed. Okay, so moving on quickly from the project form, the next question is beneficiaries. And here it's just the total number of beneficiaries that you're expecting to reach for this project. So as I said before, it's different to last year where we're not asking you to disaggregate the data, but keeping in mind that you will need to disaggregate for performance reports. So we expect that you still collect and have this information, just for streamlining and efficiency. Here we've taken that out and we just want the total number. The next section here is on evaluations. So it's going to ask you two questions that may, guide on how you answer this section. So the first question is, has this project been evaluated in the last 3 years? So as I said before, it is a requirement in the ANCP manual that all projects are evaluated every 3 years. And then the next question is, will there be an evaluation undertaken for this project in this current ADPlan period? So if you say no, the project hasn't been evaluated in the last 3 years, there's an option for you to provide details why. For example, the project could be moving into its 4th year and you were looking at doing multiple evaluations over projects and it made sense to delay it just, a little bit over 3 years so it could work into the other evaluations that you're doing. But, it is a requirement that they're done every 3 years, so the information in here is, going to need to be a valid reason as to why there hasn't been one conducted in the last 3 years. If you are conducting an evaluation, there's space there just for you to provide a summary of the evaluation approach. The next section here, these two sections here about government policy and programs, haven't changed from last year. So basically there's space here for you to outline how the project aligns with the host government policy, strategy or programs, as well as how it complements the Australian aid policies, strategies or programs. The next section here is on gender equality. This has slightly changed from last year, but not dramatically. So first of all, it's going to ask you how your project is addressing gender equality, and the responses here are, as you can see, we've got principal, significant or not targeted. So if I just go back here, if you select principal or significant, the first question is going to ask you approximately what percentage of beneficiaries are women and girls or sex indeterminate. This here is just, you know, not an estimate, but it doesn't have to be a solid number that we'll hold you to. It's just to get a gauge that if you're selecting principal, but only 6% of beneficiaries in this program, you know, are women and girls, you know, it's probably going to flag to you that maybe the project or the project isn't going to have a principal gender marker. As well as if you select principal or significant, there's a list of there's a list here that you'll need to check off to make sure that you've complied with, to make sure that the project itself can be listed as principal or significant. So these tick boxes here will be mandatory for principal. So if you haven't done one of those things, then you can't select principal for this project. The next one here for principal is not targeted, and if you select not targeted, you'll just get a note that details, you know, even if you've selected not targeted, you know, the project wouldn't be gender blind. So it should still have some gender aspects, but the project itself for gender is not targeted. For disability, this has changed slightly from last year in terms of the definitions of what we're capturing. So this year, the first question here around disability inclusion is, what approach is the activity taking to address accessibility for people with disabilities and opportunities for their inclusion? So as you can see on the screen, 3 options that we have now are a mainstream approach, a targeted approach, and a twin track approach. So depending on the response that you select here, again, it's going to ask you what percentage of beneficiaries are people with a disability, as well as these 2 questions below that ask about how your project is, you know, or what aspects of your project have a disability inclusion. So for this question, one of these boxes must be selected, but you know, it could be either of them or it could be both. It's up to you guys to include that as it relates to your project. The last kind of section that we have in the project form is the other information. So it's lists the private sector development, Indigenous peoples, family planning, and family planning. So this year it's been pared back, similar to, you know, beneficiaries here, where we're just asking, does the project involve the private sector or does it involve participants with, you know, Indigenous or ethnic minorities? However, for family planning, as we're still required to collect this information, if the project has a family planning element, it's going to ask you, please provide the number of expected beneficiaries. So that's the only thing that has stayed the same as last year. The next section is on indicators, which you'll notice there kind of isn't a section here, as that is a major change from last year, that for the ad plans, we're not asking for you to select indicators, but again, similar to beneficiaries, we are looking for that information in performance reports, so please don't forget about it. You know, we still expect that you have that information and that, you know, that's something that you guys have, but for the ad plans, we don't need it listed here. And the final section here, other information, is just a free space if you have anything that you need to include. You know, maybe, you know, you want to include, some information about the design if it's a new project or whatever it is. There's space here where you can tell us information, or I think if I move across the page, just these words here probably hasn't translated across from the form exactly, but there will also be space there for you to attach documents. So you can attach more than one. So if I go back, there's space for you to detail here, so type out to us any information that you want to tell us, as well as uploading any documents if you feel that it's necessary for us to see them. Okay, and then the last section here is just a certification review, so similar to the ADPlan, just makes, kind of prompts you to check these things, and then you can submit. In terms of once you've finalised all your projects and your header, there's no hard or fast rule as to whether you submit your header first and then your programs if you are using a program approach. And sorry, I didn't talk about the programs themselves, but the program form itself, but this hasn't changed from last year and is fairly self-explanatory. So this is kind of why we haven't used the time now to go through it. But of course, if you have any questions on the program form itself, please get in touch and we'd be happy to answer them. But in terms of submitting, our advice would be to submit the project forms first and then your header. The only reason why we say this is if you're going through and submitting your project forms and you realise, for example, that there's an error in the funding amount that you've listed or your beneficiaries, you have the space to change that there, and then this information will translate into your header. If you have submitted your header and then you go through and submit your project forms, as your header is already submitted, it won't recognise those changes and update. So purely in terms of that, I think it's just a good idea to submit your project forms, your program, and then your header. We've just got one question here that's come through that says, we understand that there is plan to review the MELF indicators. Can we expect for the performance report for the financial year 1920 will be asked to report against the current set of MELF indicators? So big caveat around that, as Heather or Jackie, the M&E colleague, big caveat around that, as Heather or Jackie, the M&E colleagues, aren't here with me, but yes, I understand that that is how it is. So you will be asked to report on the current set of MELF indicators. If, however, that does change, of course, we will let you know as soon as possible. But right now, as it stands, it should be the current set. So keep working towards that. But of course, if there are any changes, we'll notify you straight away. There's also one other question here that says, can you please confirm what the quick reference guide is saying in the first section for phased projects, and how do you keep the existing ADPlan project form? So thanks for that question. That is a good point just to raise here. Basically, all the information that's been migrated over from your 1918 ADPlan forms into 1920, there of course could be some projects in there that you are discontinuing for a vast set of reasons, or that you are combining if if your project evaluation has the outcome has been that it makes sense for you to combine these two projects. So what you'll need to do, if there are any changes from your 1819 form in terms of you not needing that form for this year, email the project number form that is listed in Smarty Grants to us, and we will be able to delete that form for you. So basically what you'll do is, if you're merging two projects into a new project for the phase project, you'll keep one project form there, which for the 1920 period will have all the information about the combined projects and what you're doing for this financial year. And the information that's in the other project form that you've translated into the new combined form, as that's no longer needed anymore, we will delete that for you. So hopefully that makes sense. And of course, if you have any projects that you are combining and means you have project forms that you need deleted, please email those through to us, and we can delete those there. Thank you so much for staying on the line, and again I apologise, this is my second webinar that I've gone 15 minutes over time, so hopefully it was worth it, and thank you everyone for your questions. Questions for today and for staying on the line. There is just to show you here, we have the last slide here, which of course shows our contact details. So as I've been saying throughout, please email the ANCP if you have any questions, and of course we've got the phone number, generic phone number there that someone should answer, unless we're all in a meeting or something. So please give us a call or please email us with any questions that you have. As I said, we're here to help up until Friday, the 28th, I think it is. Even though the ad plans are due on 30th, on the 30th of June, we'll be in the office up until the 28th on the Friday, so please get in touch. Otherwise, stay tuned for us to be emailing out your grant amounts, and hopefully we'll talk and see a lot of you soon. So again, thanks everyone for participating, and have a great rest of the afternoon. And sorry, just one thing if you have the time to stay on the end of the line for the short survey questions that are there that's done by ACFID. So thanks again and have a great afternoon.